What if the person you were hired to protect was a distraction, a decoy designed to hide a truth so profound it could shatter your entire world? What if the greatest treasure you could ever guard was the one you already held in your arms every single night, completely unaware of its value? This is a story about a father's love, a powerful man's search for redemption, and the shocking revelation that changes everything. We love to hear how our stories connect with you, so please tell us which country you're watching from in the comments. And for more stories that promise to inspire and move you, remember to subscribe to our channel. The air in Julian Croft's office was a carefully curated masterpiece of intimidation. It was cold, not just in temperature, but in spirit. Glass and chrome glinted under recessed lighting, reflecting a panoramic view of a city that seemed to bow at the building's feet. Julian sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, a throne from which he commanded empires of finance and law. His suit was a whisper of tailored perfection, his gaze a pair of sharpened steel instruments, dissecting the man who stood before him. That man was Elias Vance. Elias stood in the center of the vast Persian rug, his work-worn hands clasped loosely in front of him. He wore a simple, clean jacket, but it seemed to absorb the room's opulence and fade, making him look even more out of place. He was a sturdy oak in a forest of steel, his quiet presence a stark rebellion against the room's sterile power. "You come highly recommended, Mr. Vance," Julian said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble floors. "They say you are discreet. They say you are reliable. More than that, they say you are invisible when you need to be." Elias simply nodded, his eyes meeting Julian's without flinching. In his gaze, there was no challenge, only a deep, settled calm that seemed to unnerve the powerful lawyer. This was not the deference Julian was accustomed to. It was a form of quiet equality he couldn't comprehend. Julian steepled his fingers, the gesture practiced and precise. He was a man who left nothing to chance, a grandmaster in a world of pawns. "The situation is delicate," he continued, his eyes narrowing. "You will be guarding Isabel Davenport. She is the sole heir to her uncle's estate, one of the largest private fortunes in the country. With that kind of money comes predators, vultures. You will be her shadow, her shield. You will live at the estate. Your sole purpose will be her safety. The compensation, as you know, is substantial." He said the word substantial as if it were the answer to every question a man like Elias could possibly have. He expected to see a flicker of greed, a hint of awe. Instead, Elias's expression remained unchanged, his focus unwavering. He was listening to the words, but he was hearing the current of fear that ran beneath them. He was a student of human nature, taught by the harsh curriculum of loss and the profound syllabus of fatherhood. He saw past the expensive suit and the powerful desk to the man behind them. A man wound as tightly as a watch spring, terrified of dropping the precious cargo he held. Elias wasn't just being hired for his skills. He was being hired to carry the weight of Julian Croft's anxiety. "I understand the terms," Elias said, his voice even and low, a stark contrast to the sharp metallic echoes of the room. "Her safety will be my only priority." Julian leaned back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He wasn't accustomed to this kind of placid confidence. The men he usually hired were ex-military, their strength a loud, broadcasted warning. Elias was different. His strength was absorbent, like the earth. It didn't boast. It simply was. "Good," Julian said, his tone clipped. "You will be driven to the estate this evening. Your quarters are prepared. You will answer to me, and only to me. Miss Davenport is particular. She is grieving. Do not engage with her unless necessary. You are a function, mister. Vance, a piece of security infrastructure. Is that clear? The dehumanizing words hung in the air, a final test of the man's composure. Julian was searching for a crack, a weakness he could leverage for control. He found none. Elias simply gave another slow, deliberate nod. Crystal clear, Mr. Croft. He turned to leave, his movements economical and quiet. As his hand touched the cold steel of the door handle, he paused for a fraction of a second, his back still to the lawyer. My daughters, he said, the words holding a warmth that was alien to this room. I'll need to see them on my days off. That was part of our agreement. Julian waved a dismissive hand, already turning his attention to a stack of files. Your personal arrangements are of no concern to me, as long as the job is done. The door clicked shut, leaving Julian alone in his silent glass kingdom, a profound and unsettling stillness in the space where the humble man had just stood. Elias's home was not a house. It was a haven. It was a small, two-bedroom bungalow nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street, a world away from the cold, soaring towers of the city. While Julian Croft's office was a symphony of muted grays and sharp angles, Elias's home was a chaotic orchestra of warmth and life. The walls were covered in crayon drawings and school photos. A half-finished puzzle sat on the coffee table, and the air smelled of laundry soap and the faint, sweet scent of cinnamon from that morning's oatmeal. This was his kingdom, and his crown jewels were his two daughters, 10-year-old Maya and 6-year-old Lily. When he walked through the door, the weight of Julian Croft's world slid from his shoulders, replaced by a much heavier, yet infinitely more precious, burden. Two small bodies launched themselves at him. Daddy! Lily's shriek was pure joy, her small arms wrapping around his leg like a vine. Maya, ever the more reserved and thoughtful one, hugged his waist, her face buried in his jacket. He knelt, scooping them both into an embrace that felt more real and valuable than all the money in the Davenport estate. He breathed in the scent of their hair, a mix of sunshine and strawberry shampoo, and felt his purpose solidify. This was why he did it. This was for them. He sat them down on the worn, comfortable sofa, its cushions softened by years of bedtime stories and movie nights. He held their small hands, his calloused palms a stark contrast to their smooth, delicate skin. I have a new job, he began, his voice gentle. It's a very important job, and it's going to help us a lot. But it means I'll have to stay there some nights. Maya's brow furrowed with the seriousness of a 10-year-old trying to grasp an adult concept. Where is it, Dad? She asked, her voice quiet. It's a very big house, far away, he said, choosing his words carefully. I'll be looking after someone, making sure they're safe. It was Lily, however, who cut through the practicalities with the unerring simplicity of a child. She tilted her head, her big, curious eyes, so much like her mother's, fixed on his. The person you're protecting, are they sad, Daddy? The question hung in the air, so pure and perceptive it caught him off guard. He hadn't thought about Isabel Davenport as sad. He'd have been told she was particular, an heiress, a responsibility. But Lily saw the heart of it. A girl who had lost her family had to be sad. Yes, sweetie, he answered, his voice thick with emotion. I think she probably is. Lily nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Then you have to be extra nice, she declared with 6-year-old certainty. Mommy always said being nice is like giving someone a blanket when their heart is cold. The Davenport estate was less a home and more a monument to loneliness. It stood on acres of manicured land, a sprawling stone beast of a house surrounded by gardens so perfect they looked unreal. As Elias was shown to his small, sterile room in a separate wing, he felt the oppressive silence of the place. It was the silence of emptiness, of a life lived without laughter or warmth. His first meeting with Isabel Davenport confirmed his feeling. She was a ghost haunting her own gilded cage. She was 19, with a sharp, angular beauty and eyes that held a storm of grief and anger. She swept past him in the grand foyer, her head held high, not even gracing him with a glance. To her, he was just another part of the scenery, a fixture as inanimate as the marble statues that lined the hall. Over the next few days, he became her shadow, silent and observant. He saw the way she roamed the cavernous rooms, her fingers tracing the spines of books she never opened, her gaze lingering on portraits of a family she barely knew. He saw her at night, a lonely silhouette in a window, staring out at a world that saw her as a name, an inheritance, a headline. She was surrounded by everything, yet she had nothing. From his downtown office, Julian Croft monitored the estate with obsessive precision. He had security feeds, hourly reports, a direct line to Elias. Every precaution was a brick in the wall he was building around the girl, a fortress to keep his own demons at bay. His obsession with Isabel's safety was not about her. It was about his sister, Sarah. The memory was a fresh wound, a ghost that sat at his desk with him every day. Sarah had been vibrant, full of life, and she had trusted him. "You're so serious, Jules." She used to laugh, ruffling his perfectly combed hair. "You're going to conquer the world, but don't forget to live in it." He hadn't listened. He was busy conquering, building his empire, making his name. When she had called him, her voice small and scared, worried about a man she was dating. He had been in the middle of a multi-million-dollar merger. "I'm busy, Sarah," he'd said, his tone impatient. "I'll call you tonight. Just be careful." He never called. That night, the man she was afraid of broke into her apartment. Sarah was gone. The guilt was a cancer in his soul. He had all the power and money in the world, but he couldn't turn back time. Isabel Davenport was his penance. He would not fail again. He would control every variable, eliminate every threat. He would pour his wealth and power into her protection. A desperate, futile attempt to save the ghost of his sister. The flashbacks came to Elias not in dreams, but in the quiet moments of the day. The scent of roses in the Davenport garden would transport him back 10 years to a small, sun-drenched apartment filled with laughter. He saw his wife, Clara, her hands covered in flour as she tried to bake a birthday cake, her smile radiant. She was the architect of his happiness, the calm center of his world. They had so little, but they had everything. "You worry too much, Eli," she would tell him, wiping a smudge of flour on his nose. "We have each other. We have Maya. That makes us richer than any king." Her spirit was pure, unburdened by envy or ambition. It was this quality that had captured the attention of the reclusive billionaire, Alistair Davenport. She had taken a job as a part-time companion and assistant for the old man, a position most people couldn't endure for more than a few weeks. But Clara saw past the gruff, eccentric exterior to the profound loneliness within. She didn't flatter him or fear him. She treated him like a person. She'd bring him cookies from home, tell him stories about Maya's latest adventures at the park, and listen for hours as he spoke of his regrets, the empire he built that had cost him his family. She brought a sliver of genuine, unvarnished life into his gilded prison. Julian Croft had his own ghosts, his own private cinema of regret that played on a loop in the back of his mind. He remembered the phone call, the one he dismissed. He remembered the police at his door, their faces grim and professional. He remembered the hollowed-out feeling at the funeral, the accusing stares from family members, the silent scream in his own chest that had never truly faded. He had channeled that scream into work, into a relentless, punishing pursuit of success. Power became his armor, control his addiction. He built a fortress of wealth around his heart, ensuring no one could ever get close enough to hurt him, and he could never be in a position of helplessness again. He looked at the live security feed from the Davenport estate, his finger tracing the outline of Isabel's form as she walked the grounds, with Elias a respectful distance behind her. He saw a girl who needed protection, a fragile asset to be secured. He didn't see a person, he saw a symbol of his past failure. He was protecting the memory of his sister, and in his cold, calculated grief, he was blind to the humanity of everyone involved, including himself. This mission was not about justice or duty. It was a transaction. He was paying an immense price, both financially and emotionally, to buy himself a sliver of peace that never seemed to arrive. Back in the present, Elias found his attempts to connect with Isabel met with a wall of ice. He'd offer her a bottle of water after a walk, and she would ignore him. He'd mentioned that the forecast called for rain, suggesting she take a jacket, and she'd walk out into the garden without one, as if to spite him. He was nothing more than a piece of furniture to her, a constant, silent presence she refused to acknowledge. Yet, Elias was patient. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. He saw the way she clutched a small, worn teddy bear at night when she sat by her window. It was a relic from a childhood that had been stolen from her, first by neglect from her jet-setting parents, and now by their sudden death and the crushing weight of her uncle's fortune. One afternoon, he found her in the library, staring at a large oil portrait of Alistair Davenport. The man in the painting looked stern, powerful, and deeply unhappy. "He was never here," Isabel said, suddenly, her voice startlingly loud in the quiet room. She hadn't turned to look at Elias, but she knew he was there. "He sent money, presents. He even sent a letter once a year for my birthday, but he was never here. This house, this money, it's not a gift. It's a cage he built for himself, and now I'm the one trapped in it." Before Elias could respond, she turned and swept out of the room, leaving him alone with the portrait of the sad, wealthy king. The memory that defined Elias's life was bittersweet, a perfect moment captured in amber just before the world shattered. Clara was pregnant with Lily, her belly round and full under her simple cotton dress. She was glowing, filled with a joy so profound it seemed to light up their tiny apartment. She had just come home from a day with Mr. Davenport, and she was holding a small velvet box. "He gave me something," she said, her voice a whisper of awe. "For the new baby." Elias felt a familiar prickle of concern. He was wary of the old billionaire's influence, protective of his wife's pure heart. "Clara, we don't need his gifts." She smiled and placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "It's not like that, Eli. You don't understand him. He's just lonely. He said he was proud of us, of the family we're building." She opened the box. Inside, nestled on the velvet, was not a diamond necklace or an expensive jewel, but a simple silver locket on a delicate chain. It was beautiful but modest. "He said it was his mother's," Clara whispered, her eyes shining. "He said it was for someone with a heart good enough to deserve it." She opened the locket. On one side was a space for a photo. The other was solid silver. "He told me true value isn't something you can see," she said, closing it and fastening it around her neck. Weeks later, after giving birth to a beautiful, healthy Lily, Clara was gone, taken by a sudden infection that no doctor could stop. Elias was left with 2 daughters, a shattered heart, and a simple silver locket that held the last beautiful memory he had of his wife. A week into the assignment, Julian made an unscheduled visit to the estate. He moved through the house like a storm front, his presence sucking the warmth from the air. He found Elias in the security monitoring room, his eyes on the screens. Julian didn't bother with pleasantries. "Report," he commanded. "Any threats? Any unusual activity?" Elias shook his head. "The perimeter is secure. Miss Davenport has not left the grounds. There have been no incidents." Julian's eyes scanned the monitors, his gaze critical and unforgiving. He was looking for flaws, for imperfections. "She seems withdrawn," he noted, more to himself than to Elias. "Is she eating?" The question was so unexpectedly domestic that it momentarily surprised Elias. "The staff prepares her meals," Elias replied evenly, "but she mostly just picks at them." Julian made a frustrated noise in the back of his throat. He was controlling the external threats, but he couldn't control the girl's own self-destruction. This was the variable he couldn't account for: her grief, her spirit. He turned his frustration on Elias. "Your job is to keep her safe. That includes from herself. Keep a closer watch. I want to know if her mood shifts. I want to know everything." He saw Elias as a simple tool, a security camera with legs. He was utterly blind to the fact that the quiet man before him understood loss and grief more profoundly than Julian ever could. The dramatic irony was a chasm between them. The audience knew of Elias's silent, noble pain, while Julian saw only a hired hand. Elias continued his quiet vigil, his patience a deep, unmoving river. He started leaving a fresh flower on the small table outside Isabel's room each morning, a single gardenia from the greenhouse. He did it without expectation, a small, silent offering of life in a house that felt like a tomb. For days, the flowers were ignored. Then one morning, he saw her pause as she left her room. She looked at the white blossom, her expression unreadable. She didn't take it, but she didn't throw it away. She simply looked at it for a long moment before continuing down the hall. It was the first crack in the ice. Elias knew that healing wasn't a grand event. It was a series of small, quiet moments, of tiny gestures that whispered, "You are seen." He was not just her protector. He was a witness to her solitude. And in his silent way, he was letting her know she was not entirely alone. He was planting seeds of kindness in the barren soil of her sorrow, watering them with a patience born from his own profound understanding of what it meant to feel your world collapse. He wasn't following Julian Croft's orders to monitor her moods. He was following the instincts of a man who knew that the deepest wounds are invisible. The call came on a Tuesday morning. The kindly elderly woman who watched Maya and Lily had the flu and couldn't take them. Elias's carefully constructed schedule collapsed. He had no one else, no family nearby to call. Panic tightened its icy grip around his chest. The thought of telling Julian Croft, of admitting to a personal complication, was unthinkable. The man would see it as a critical failure, a distraction that compromised the mission. Elias would be fired instantly, but the thought of leaving his daughters alone was an absolute impossibility. After hours of wrestling with his choices, he made a desperate decision. He would bring them to the estate. He would keep them in his small room, keep them quiet. It was a tremendous risk, a gamble that could cost him everything, but his daughters were his non-negotiable truth. As he drove them through the imposing iron gates of the Davenport property, he felt like a smuggler carrying precious, forbidden cargo. Maya was wide-eyed and silent, sensing her father's tension. Lily, on the other hand, looked at the sprawling mansion and the perfect gardens with a sense of wonder, not intimidation. "It's like a castle, Daddy," she whispered, her face pressed against the car window. "Does a princess live here?" Elias looked at her innocent, joyful face in the rearview mirror, and his heart ached. "Something like that, sweetie," he said, praying his gamble wouldn't backfire. He settled the girls in his modest quarters, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a tiny bathroom. It was a world away from the luxury of the main house. He gave them coloring books and a tablet with headphones, laying down the law with a gentle but firm tone. "You have to be as quiet as little mice," he whispered. "This is Daddy's secret. Can you do that for me?" Maya nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity. Lily put a finger to her lips. "Secret mission." She giggled softly. For a few hours, the plan worked. Elias was able to monitor the security feeds from the desk in his room, glancing over every few minutes to see his daughters quietly entertaining themselves. But the curiosity of a 6-year-old is a powerful force. While Elias was focused on a perimeter alert that turned out to be a deer, and Maya was engrossed in a book, Lily slipped out of the room. The door, left slightly ajar, was an invitation she couldn't resist. The long, silent hallways of the mansion were not frightening to her. They were a grand adventure. She padded along the thick carpets, her small hand trailing along the wall, her eyes wide with wonder at the towering vases and dark, imposing paintings. She was a splash of vibrant, innocent life in a monochrome museum of sorrow. Julian Croft was in the main study, having arrived for another surprise inspection. He was standing before the massive fireplace, staring at a small, silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of him and his sister, Sarah, taken years ago on a family vacation. They were teenagers, their arms slung around each other, both of them grinning at the camera, their faces bright with a future that had not yet been stolen. He touched the frame, his finger tracing Sarah's smiling face. In these quiet, private moments, the mask of the powerful lawyer would fall away, revealing the broken brother beneath. A wave of suffocating grief washed over him, so intense it was dizzying. It was in this moment of raw vulnerability that a small voice pierced the silence. "Are you sad?" Julian froze, his back rigid. He turned slowly, his mind racing to identify the security breach. He expected to see a staff member, an intruder. He did not expect to see a little girl, no older than 6, standing in the doorway. She was holding a slightly battered-looking doll and regarding him with an expression of pure, unfiltered curiosity. Her eyes were large and clear and held no trace of fear. For a moment, Julian was so stunned he couldn't speak. "Who are you?" he finally managed, his voice harsher than he intended. Lily was not intimidated. She was used to grown-ups with furrowed brows and serious voices. She took a few steps into the room, her gaze fixed on the photograph in his hand. "You were looking at the picture," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "When my daddy looks at pictures of my mommy, he gets sad, too." She walked right up to him, a small, fearless messenger. She reached into the pocket of her little dress and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. She carefully unfolded it to reveal a small, slightly blurry photo of a woman with a radiant smile. "Clara, this is my mommy," Lily said, holding it up for him to see. "She's in heaven. My daddy says she is always with us, like a star we can't see in the daytime, but is still there." Julian stared from the photo of the smiling woman to the earnest face of the little girl. The child's simple, profound words bypassed all his defenses. They were not calculated or manipulative. They were a pure, simple truth offered from one heart to another. A crack appeared in the fortress around his own heart, a fissure through which a tiny sliver of light was suddenly streaming. He sank to his knees, not out of weakness, but because he was suddenly, inexplicably, on her level. He looked at her, truly saw her, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than guilt or anger. he felt a profound, aching connection. From the hallway, two figures watched this incredible scene unfold. Elias, who had finally noticed Lily was missing, had been searching for her in a state of quiet panic. His heart had hammered against his ribs when he saw her walk into the study with Julian Croft. He had been about to rush in, to apologize and accept the termination of his employment, but then he saw Julian kneel. He saw the hard lines of the lawyer's face soften, crumble. He saw the man's shoulders, usually so straight and rigid, slump in a gesture of profound emotional surrender. The other observer was Isabel. Drawn by the sound of voices, she had peered around the corner of the doorway, expecting to see Croft berating a member of the staff. Instead, she saw this powerful, intimidating man on his knees before a small child, his carefully constructed mask of authority completely gone. She saw a genuine, unguarded human moment, something so rare in her life that it felt like a mirage. She felt a strange pang in her chest, a complex emotion she couldn't name. It was a mixture of jealousy, confusion, and a deep, unfamiliar longing to be part of something so real. She watched as the little girl, this stranger, reached out a tiny hand and patted Julian's arm, a simple gesture of comfort that seemed to hold more power than all the money in that house. The encounter changed everything. When Elias finally entered the room, ready to face the consequences, Julian simply looked up at him, his eyes filled with a new, startling awareness. There was no anger. "This is your daughter?" he asked, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual authority. Elias nodded, his throat tight. "I'm sorry, sir. My childcare fell through. It won't happen again." Julian stood up slowly, still looking at Lily, who now hid shyly behind her father's legs. "What is her name?" he asked. "Lily," Elias replied. Julian seemed to taste the name, repeating it softly under his breath. "Lily." He then looked at Elias, but his gaze was different. He wasn't looking at an employee anymore. He was looking at a father. He was seeing the man for the first time. "It's all right, Vez," he said, and the use of his last name was no longer a dismissal, but a mark of newfound, if reluctant, respect. "No harm done." He turned and left the study without another word, leaving a stunned Elias and a confused Isabel in his wake. The emotional tectonic plates of their world had shifted, and the aftershocks were only just beginning to be felt. The innocent catalyst had done her work, piercing the armor of the powerful figure and forcing him to see the world and the people in it through a new lens. Julian returned to his office, but the cold, sterile space now felt different. It felt empty. The view of the city no longer looked like a kingdom at his feet, but a lonely expanse of glass and steel. Lily's words echoed in his mind, like a star we can't see in the daytime, but is still there. The simple, poetic sentiment had unlocked a part of him he thought had died with his sister. He had been trying to pay a debt to a ghost with money and control, when all his grief had ever wanted was acknowledgement, a simple human connection. He found himself thinking about Elias Vance. He had dismissed him as a simple man, a cog in his machine. But this simple man was raising two daughters on his own, one of whom possessed an emotional intelligence that could disarm the most powerful man Julian knew: himself. Who was this man, really? This quiet, humble groundskeeper turned bodyguard, who seemed to possess a quiet strength that Julian, with all his resources, could not purchase. For the first time, Julian Croft's curiosity outweighed his need for control. He wanted to understand the man he had hired, not as an asset, but as a human being. This newfound curiosity led him back to Alistair Davenport's files. He had combed through the legal and financial documents 100 times, but he had always ignored the personal effects boxes of journals, letters, and mementos he had deemed irrelevant to the execution of the will. Now, driven by a new unfamiliar impulse, he had the boxes brought to his office. He opened the first one and was met with the musty smell of old paper. He pulled out a leather-bound journal. Alistair Davenport's handwriting was a spidery, elegant scrawl. Julian began to read, expecting tales of business conquests and corporate intrigue. Instead, he found the lonely, regretful ramblings of an old man who had built an empire but lost everything that mattered. The pages were filled with remorse over his estranged family, his failed marriage, and the friends he had alienated with his ruthless ambition. It was like reading a confession from a man who had conquered the world only to find himself its sole, miserable inhabitant. Julian felt an uncomfortable shock of recognition. He saw his own future reflected in the old man's lonely words. Then, a name began to appear in the journal entries, a recurring beacon of light in the otherwise gloomy text. Clara. Clara came today, one entry read. She brought a drawing from her little girl, Maya, a clumsy, beautiful little drawing of a sun with a smiling face. I have hung it on my wall. It is the only thing in this house that feels real. Julian's breath caught in his throat. Clara, Lily's mother, Elias Vance's late wife. He read on, his fascination growing with every page. Alistair wrote about Clara not as an employee, but as a confidant, a friend, the daughter he wished he'd had. She asks for nothing, another entry stated. In a world of grasping, greedy hands, hers is the only one that has ever offered me something without an ulterior motive, kindness. She does not see the billionaire, she sees the man. I fear my own family waits for my death like vultures. But this girl, this stranger, has shown me more genuine affection than I have known in 30 years. She is the true heir, not to my fortune, but to my spirit. The words were a revelation, a secret emotional will that Julian had completely overlooked. Julian read late into the night, the city lights twinkling outside his window like a galaxy of distant, indifferent stars. He learned of Alistair's deep affection for Clara, of his admiration for the life she and Elias were building, a life rich in love, if not in money. And then he found the entry he had been searching for, the missing piece of the puzzle. I gave Clara a gift today, Alistair had written, a simple silver locket that belonged to my mother. A small thing, but it holds great meaning. I told her that true value is not what is on the surface. Inside, I have placed something for her, a small token, a key to my true legacy. She may never discover it, but it is there nonetheless. A testament to the fact that one good heart is worth more than all the gold in the world. Julian sat back in his chair, the journal resting in his hands. A locket, a key, a true legacy. The legal will, the one he was executing, suddenly felt hollow, incomplete. It was a document of finance and property, but Alistair's heart, his true final wish, was hidden somewhere else entirely. And Julian had a strong suspicion that the quiet, unassuming man he had hired to protect a false heiress was the one who held the key. That same evening, in the small, warm bungalow filled with the quiet sounds of his sleeping children, Elias was mending one of Lily's dolls. Maya sat at the kitchen table, finishing her homework. The house was peaceful, a sanctuary from the cold, complicated world of the Davenport estate. Lily, already in her pajamas, came into the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She climbed onto her father's lap, clutching the silver locket that she often wore, the one that had been her mother's. "Tell me a story about Mommy," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. Elias smiled, his heart aching with love and loss. "Your Mommy was the kindest person I ever knew," he began, his voice soft. She could make anyone smile, even grumpy old men. As he spoke, Lily fidgeted with the locket's clasp. It was old and worn, and she'd never been able to open it herself. But tonight, with a strange, accidental twist, the clasp gave way. The locket sprang open in her small hand. Elias had seen it open 1,000 times, but tonight was different. A tiny folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, fell from the side that was supposed to be solid silver and fluttered onto his lap. Elias stared at the minuscule piece of paper. His heart began to pound. In all the years since Clara's death, he had never known anything was hidden inside. He and Lily looked at each other, their eyes wide with shared surprise. With trembling fingers, he picked it up and carefully unfolded it. The paper was fragile, on the verge of turning to dust. On it, in Alistair Davenport's distinctive, elegant script, was a short message. It was not a legal document, but a note from the heart. It read, "For Clara, the only one who saw the man and not the money, my fortune has been a cage. My true legacy is the kindness you have shown the world. Take care of this key. It opens what truly matters." Taped to the bottom of the note was a small, ornate, and very unusual-looking key. It was a key Elias had never seen before. It was a key that did not belong to their small house or their old car. It was a key to a mystery he never knew existed, a legacy left to his wife that had been resting over his daughter's heart all these years. The weight of the discovery settled upon him, a profound and startling revelation that whispered of a destiny he could not yet comprehend. The next morning, Julian Croft called Elias. His voice was completely different. The cold, commanding tone was gone, replaced by a sense of urgency and respect. "Vance," he said, "I need you to come to my office, now, and bring your daughters with you." The request was so bizarre, so out of character, that Elias was momentarily speechless. But there was no refusing the command in Julian's voice. An hour later, Elias and his 2 daughters stood once again in the intimidating, glass-walled office. This time, however, the dynamic was entirely different. Julian wasn't behind his desk. He was standing by the window, and when he turned to face them, his expression was not one of power, but of intense, sober inquiry. He knelt down to speak to Lily. "Lily," he said gently, "may I see your necklace?" Lily, trusting the man who had looked so sad the day before, nodded and allowed Julian to examine the locket. He looked at the secret compartment, his theory confirmed. He then looked up at Elias, his gaze locking with the other man's. "Your wife," Julian said, his voice heavy with meaning. "Her name was Clara. She worked for Alistair Davenport." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact he had unearthed that was about to change all of their lives. Elias nodded slowly, his hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. He felt as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice. He explained how Clara had worked as a companion for the old man, how she had spoken of his kindness, of his loneliness. He told Julian about the locket, the gift Alistair had given her just before Lily was born. As he spoke, he pulled a small folded note and the tiny key from his pocket. "We just found this last night," he said, handing them to the lawyer. Julian took them with a hand that was surprisingly unsteady. He read the note, his face a mask of awe and comprehension. It all made sense now. The journals, the locket, the talk of a true legacy. It wasn't about Isabel. It had never been about Isabel. He looked at the key, then strode to a large, antique writing desk that had belonged to Alistair Davenport, a piece Julian had moved to his own office as a memento. He ran his hands along the underside, his fingers searching for something he had never known was there. He found it, a small, almost invisible keyhole, cunningly hidden in the ornate woodwork. He inserted the tiny key from the locket. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, a hidden drawer sprang open, a secret compartment that all his legal searches had never uncovered. Inside the drawer lay a thick manila envelope and a small, sleek digital device. Julian's hands trembled as he lifted them out. The envelope contained a set of legally binding documents, signed and notarized, dated just 1 month before Alistair Davenport's death. It was his true and final will and testament, completely superseding the one Julian had been executing. Julian picked up the digital device and pressed the single button on its side. A beam of light shot out, projecting a holographic image of Alistair Davenport into the center of the room. The old man looked frail, but his eyes were sharp, filled with a clarity and purpose Julian had never seen in his final days. He looked directly at the camera, as if he could see them all, standing there in the future. "If you are watching this," the hologram of Alistair began, his voice raspy but firm, "it means that kindness has found its way. It means that Clara, or someone she loves, has unlocked my final secret." He smiled, a faint, sad smile. "I have left my niece, Isabel, a trust. Enough to live comfortably, enough to find her own way, but not enough to destroy her. The pressure of my full fortune would have been a poison to her soul. She needs to build a life, not inherit a cage." Alistair's holographic image turned slightly, as if looking directly at Elias and his daughters. "My true legacy, my company, my homes, the entirety of the Davenport fortune, I leave in trust to the children of the one person who showed me selfless compassion in my final years. The children of Clara Vance." The words hung in the air, electric and reality-altering. Elias stared, his mind struggling to process the information. Maya's eyes were wide with disbelief. Lily simply looked at the hologram of the old man with childlike curiosity. "The fortune is not a gift," Alistair's voice continued. "It is a responsibility. It is to be managed by a board, with Julian Croft as its chairman. He is a good man, though he does not yet know it. He is a man who understands the weight of responsibility. And I name Elias Vance, Clara's husband, as a co-trustee. He is a man who understands the meaning of value. Together, they will ensure this money is used not for selfish gain, but for good. They will ensure my legacy is one of charity, of innovation, and of kindness. And most importantly, they will ensure that Clara's daughters are raised with the values their mother embodied: love, humility, and integrity. They are not to be princesses in a castle. They are to be good people. That is my final wish." The hologram flickered and vanished, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The revelation was a seismic event, sending shockwaves through all their lives. Elias Vance, the humble single father, was now the guardian of one of the largest fortunes in the world. His daughters, Maya and Lily, were no longer just the children of a groundskeeper. They were the heirs to a legacy of unimaginable scale. But as Elias looked at his girls, he felt not a rush of excitement, but a deep, profound sense of terror and responsibility. He knelt down, pulling them close. "No matter what happens," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "no matter what changes, we are still us. Nothing is more important than that. Understand?" Maya and Lily nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment through their father's embrace, even if they couldn't comprehend the numbers and legalities. Julian Croft watched them, his heart aching with a complex mix of emotions: shock, awe, and a surprising, overwhelming sense of relief. The burden of his penance was lifted. His purpose was no longer to atone for his past failure by controlling a situation, but to help guide a good family through an incredible new reality. He had been given a new, better, and far more meaningful mission. The most difficult conversation was with Isabel. Julian and Elias went to the estate together to tell her. She was in the garden, listlessly pruning roses. As they explained the contents of the true will, her face went through a storm of emotions. Disbelief, then a flash of white-hot anger. Her eyes accusing Elias as if he had engineered some elaborate deception. "You?" she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "Your wife? This is a lie, a trick." But as she raged, something else began to surface, a profound exhaustion. The fight went out of her, replaced by a quiet, startling vulnerability. The anger was just a shield, protecting a heart terrified of the responsibility she had been given. Finally, she sank onto a stone bench, her shoulders slumped. "So, it's not mine?" she asked, her voice small, almost a whisper. "I have a trust," Julian explained gently, "a generous one. You'll be very comfortable, but you will have to forge your own path, build your own life." A long silence stretched between them. Then, to their astonishment, a small watery smile touched Isabel's lips. "Good," she whispered. "I never wanted it anyway. I just wanted a family." Her eyes met Elias's, and for the first time, she truly saw him. She saw his kindness, his quiet strength. "I'm sorry," she said, the words catching her throat, "for how I treated you." It was the beginning of her healing. The cage door had been opened. In the weeks that followed, a new world took shape, built on the foundations of truth and forgiveness. The relationship between Julian and Elias transformed from one of employer and employee to a deep, respectful partnership. One evening, as they worked late in Julian's office, sorting through the legal framework of the new trust, Julian finally confessed the story of his sister, Sarah. He told Elias everything: the missed phone call, the crushing guilt, the years spent trying to build a fortress of success around his pain. "I thought, if I could just control everything, if I could protect Isabel perfectly, I could somehow make up for what I did," he admitted, his voice raw with a grief he had never shared. "I was so focused on preventing the past that I was blind to the present. Your daughter, Lily, she reminded me of what's real." Elias listened, his expression one of deep empathy. He did not offer platitudes or easy comfort. He simply shared his own story of losing Clara, of the gaping hole she left behind, and of how his daughter's love had been the only thing that pulled him from the abyss. In that shared vulnerability, two men from completely different worlds found common ground, forging a bond of friendship that was stronger than any business contract. Julian was finally able to forgive himself, not because he had succeeded in his mission, but because he had finally learned to connect with another human being. The final scene is not one of opulence or power, but of simple, profound joy. It is a Sunday afternoon, months later. The setting is not the cold Davenport estate or the sterile office, but the backyard of Elias's small, humble bungalow. The yard is now filled with new playground equipment, a gift from Uncle Julian, but the house itself remains unchanged, a steadfast anchor of warmth and love. Elias is at the grill, flipping burgers, a simple, happy father. Maya is reading in a hammock, and Lily is pushing a laughing Isabel on the new swing set. Isabel is no longer the cold, distant heiress. She is a young woman finding her way, enrolled in university, and volunteering at a local youth center. She has become like an older sister to Maya and Lily. Julian Croft is there, sitting at the picnic table, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in jeans and a polo shirt. He is talking with Elias, not about stocks or legal matters, but about their children, about life. The light is warm and golden, filtering through the leaves of the old oak tree. The air is filled with laughter. This is the true inheritance. It isn't the money or the company. It is this: a new, blended family, forged in loss and rebuilt with kindness, forgiveness, and love. The single dad had been hired to protect an heiress, but he had ended up saving a powerful man from himself and showing everyone the meaning of true wealth.